Hello everyone, this is Andrew. Welcome to Keen on America.
On July 4th, 2026, America will be 250 years old, an anniversary that will, no doubt, be greeted with a mixture of celebration, contemplation, and resignation. In Keen on America, Andrew talks not just about the American past and present, but also speculates on its future. What, Andrew asks, will be the 21st century fate of this now venerable American republic?
Hello everybody. 5 years ago, seems like yesterday, but it was 5 years ago, I had the great Cass Sunstein on my show, talking to me about how social change happens. He, of course, is famous for many things. He's a Harvard professor, an advisor to Presidents Obama and Biden, and the co-author of a book called Nudge, one of the Bibles of behavioral economics. And Cass is back now with a new book, a book which I have to admit, I was actually rather surprised when I saw the title. It's called On Liberalism, not On Liberty, which John Stuart Mill wrote. It's a book about freedom, in defense of freedom. And Cass is joining us now from Harvard University in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Cass, how does a behavioral economist, and maybe you'll push back on that term, how does a behavioral economist end up writing a book about liberalism?
Well, if you're interested in law and in freedom and in choice and in self-government, you might be interested in liberalism. I've actually written about liberalism for decades in one capacity or another. In the 1980s, I wrote quite a bit about self-government and freedom, and liberalism, of course, was a background foundation of that. And in recent years, I've written a lot, scribbled a lot about freedom of speech, and the foundation for freedom of speech, at least in the Anglo-American tradition, is liberalism. And liberalism's under siege now in many nations, and it's under pressure from the left and the right. And so I scribbled some notes about liberalism to myself. Didn't know if I'd publish them. The New York Times thought it would be a good idea to run them as an op-ed. This was in 2023. It was a really long op-ed, a really short book. The op-ed got a lot of attention. It surprised me, where people on the right in particular wrote me to say, that's the form of liberalism I endorse, and people should be saying it. And some people on the left said to me, I don't really like progressive illiberalism on campus or otherwise, but this form of liberalism is something I quite like. And both the left-wing kind of generous people and the right-wing generous people said, you should turn this into a book. And I said, yes, sir, yes, madam. And that's the result.
So you talk about liberalism. Of course, a book entitled On Liberalism brings to mind John Stuart Mill's great 19th century book on liberty, in many ways the Bible for certainly 19th century, maybe 20th century liberals. I know you also have an intellectual debt to Hayek, a more conservative economist who wrote The Road to Freedom. Who are your liberal heroes? How would you define what liberalism means? It's one of these words that everyone seems to claim.
Let's think of liberalism as unified by a commitment to freedom, to pluralism, meaning lots of different types are welcome, to the rule of law, and to security, where security means freedom from fear, so that you can go about your day without fearing that you're going to be arrested or punished. I saw in China a number of decades ago susceptibility to fear, where people were hardly free from fear. So those are four pillars: freedom, security, pluralism, and the rule of law. That's connects Ronald Reagan and Franklin Delano Roosevelt. It connects Margaret Thatcher and Tony Blair. It puts on another side Hitler and Stalin and Putin, for example. My heroes include the two to which you pointed. Certainly, John Stuart Mill is a hero. Hayek, who is very controversial on the left and among progressives. A lot of them hate him. I love him. It's a ambivalent and occasionally tense love affair, but it is a love affair. John Rawls is a hero of mine, the 20th century's expositor of a certain form of liberalism. Joseph Raz, a philosopher, is a hero of mine and an expositor of a different form of liberalism. Stephen Holmes, my old colleague at the University of Chicago, now at New York University, is a hero of mine. Susan Oken, who was a political theorist at Stanford, regrettably no longer with us, is a hero of mine. There's a very long list of liberal heroes. Those are certainly toward the top of the list.
So much has been written, Cass, and you know this better than I do, about freedom. What is it that you're saying that's in any way original?
I think it might be original to focus today, at least, on big tent liberalism. So I almost called the book Big Tent Liberalism. There's such fights between people on the left who believe in, let's say, an aggressive welfare state and a lot of regulation. We can associate that with Roosevelt in the United States and Lyndon Baines Johnson in the United States. Barack Obama in some ways is associated with that. And people on the right, where Reagan is kind of the defining person, who on the other side would maybe be more in the Hayekian tradition of skepticism about regulation. What I do here is to unify them and say this is a family and there are contests within a family, but the conservative free market liberals are connected with the New Deal social democratic liberals in the sense that they are committed to the rule of law, to respect for pluralism, to respect for experiments in living across a wide range. If entrepreneurs want to try this or that or something else, go for it. If people want to embrace one set of religious commitments, great. If they want to embrace another set, that's also fine. And if they don't want to embrace any, that's fine too, at least as far as the government is concerned. And this is a tent which includes people who fight a lot about important things, but who are associated with an embrace of a shared set of commitments. It may be that it's original-ish. I hope there are original littler things in the book, but it might be it's original-ish to put a spotlight on experiments in living, which is a bit of a throwaway line from Mill. To me, it's foundational for liberalism, and it helps explain why many people are focused on entrepreneurship and innovation in the liberal tradition, and many people in the liberal tradition are focused on cultural variety, so that if you want, to experiment with a certain set of cultural things, commitments to living on the land, for example, or commitments to something else that's cultural, might involve very old religious commitments that people want to make new. These are experiments, we could describe them, which liberals are very open to and certainly will not invoke the law to stop.
I wonder whether, Cass, there are two Cass Sunsteins. Maybe not literally, but maybe one day you wake up as a liberal and another day you wake up as a behavioral economist. You have a new book out also this week called Manipulation, What It Is, Why It's Bad, and What to Do About It. This is kind of, in some ways, you said before we went live, it's taken you 15 years to write that one. This is connected in a sense with nudge and the behavioral economics around how we get people to do things. But liberalism is about individual freedom. The subtitle of the book is In Defense of Freedom. Am I right to suggest there are two Cass Sunsteins, which isn't necessarily a criticism? Maybe that's just the reality of the human condition, and you're acknowledging both sides. On the one hand, individual freedom, on the other hand, the ability for external institutions and technologies to shape us.
Well, there's a Cass Sunstein who really loves squash, and at any moment of the day wishes he were on a squash court or second choice a tennis court. And then there's a Cass Sunstein who kind of loves the classroom and loves reading about liberalism or recent social science findings or Kant. So those are two different Sunsteins. The yours truly who did the manipulation book and who's interested in nudging, and the yours truly who did the liberalism book is that's one and the same person. So the manipulation book is deeply liberal. It sees four horse people of the apocalypse as coercion, deceit, lying, and manipulation. And it sees those as allied bad things, at least across a broad terrain, because they interfere with individual autonomy. So if you lie to someone to get them to do something, you're not respecting their autonomy, that's a liberal evil. If you manipulate people to do something, that's also a liberal evil. So the beating heart of the manipulation book is why manipulation is bad. It fails to treat people with respect, and it also offends Mill's harm principle kind of through the side door, because Mill said choosers are in the best position to decide what's in their interests. A manipulator refuses to respect choosers' capacity to decide and kind of displaces that by subverting their ability to make their own choices. That's what's wrong with manipulation. So it's a deeply liberal book. The nudging enterprise is freedom promoting. So the idea behind a GPS device, which is kind of an iconic nudge, is that you get to say where you're going, whether it's London or New York or Cambridge, Massachusetts, or some place that's less well known, Waban, Massachusetts, where I was born. You get to say your destination. And if the nudge tells you something that you disagree with or dislike, you can say, well, forget about that. I'm not going to take that route because I prefer the scenic route, or I like the long way round. If a nudge tells you that this product has a lot of calories in it, or there's a ton of salt, you're informed, you've been nudged not to consume, but you retain freedom to say, well, I'm in the mood for lots of calories today, and I really like fudge, and more fudge is great. And the liberal says, that's fine, go for it. And so does the nudger. So the nudging project is liberal at its deepest foundations. And I'm hopeful that the millions, John Stuart millions out there, and hopeful also, the less confident, that the Hayekians can get on board the nudge train.
You mentioned John Rawls, and I think one of the great challenges and issues in contemporary liberalism is why some of us need perhaps more of a nudge than others. Using the example again of Cass Sunstein, Cass, you know better than I do. You're a remarkable character. You've done so many things. You're a semi-pro squash player. You're famous in the Boston area for your sporting exploits. You worked for Obama and Biden. You're some fancy university professor at Harvard. You have a very famous wife and children. Why do some people require more of a nudge than others? And how essential is that to what freedom is and how to define or redefine contemporary liberalism in the 21st century?
Okay, thank you for that. I should say if I'm a semi-pro in squash, I'd put an emphasis on the semi. And in terms of
well, how old are you? That's pretty impressive still.
I'm at least 27 years old.
Exactly.
I'd say my 16-year-old son destroys me on the tennis court, and I'm a faculty fellow for the Harvard squash team, and there isn't a single person on that team whom I can trouble on the squash court, maybe get some points. But with respect to needing nudges, that whatever age you are, if you're young or not so young, you might need health-related or safety-related nudges. So if you are dealing, let's say, with a medical issue, even to see a doctor might be something that many people need a nudge for. And if a doctor is prescribing medicine for you, whether you're 19 years old or 90 years old, we have a big problem in this country, and many countries have the same problem, which is adherence, so that people don't take the medicines that they're supposed to, and that can create over 100,000 annual deaths in the United States. And it might be someone who was 45 years old and extremely competent and kind of amazing in what they do, but they don't keep good track of their medicines. It might be that it's kind of hard to do that because their mind is so occupied by many things. Drivers need nudges. So we have a lot of deaths on roads in the United States. It's a worldwide challenge. And that's partly because to attend to everything you're supposed to attend to when you're driving isn't easy for everyone. I was recently in Ireland and my car got some scratches on it because driving on the left side of the road and maybe not as careful as I should have been. That's something where nudges, technological nudges, which might be if you're switching lanes, you hear a little scratching noise, which says, do you really want to do this? Or you're backing up. This is something I was involved in the US government. There's a camera in the United States. I also noticed this in Ireland, so you can see behind you, and you'll be nudged by the visibility of what's behind you not to hit that, whether it's a person or a dog or a wall of some kind. And to see the nudges that automobiles have, and to see the nudges that streets have, and see the nudges that the medical system provides, is a kind of inroad into an appreciation of the incomplete nature, the amazing nature, but the incomplete nature of human capacity to keep everything in mind. And nudges often draw your attention to something which is worthwhile to draw your attention to, or show you how to get where you want to go. So airports are full of nudges, and unless you're someone who's at that particular airport all the time, the fact that the airport tells you how to get to the bathroom, how to get to the gate, how to get to what kind of line is important for you, that's a blessing.
I wonder whether, in a sense, the role of government or of authority is to nudge us into feeling as if we have the power over ourselves to make important decisions.
Well, I'd say a liberal government is respectful of people's capacity to make the decisions that will define their lives. And an educational system is designed to improve people's capacity to do that. A liberal government also has other roles that are very fundamental, like protecting national defense is at the core. Supplying public goods is also at the core, like clean air, protecting people against acute horror like flooding and wildfire. That is, at least in modern understandings, part of what's at the core of government, to protect people, this is state and local, not national, from risks of fire, to provide police protection. So these are fundamental. I agree with you also that to give people the capacity to make their own choices, whether through an educational system, this is a Jeffersonian theme, or through street signs, that's pretty good to do.
What's the Cass Sunstein definition of human nature? On your X page, you have your images of rationality, decisions, and social order. Mill's On Liberty, of course, was a polemic against his father, James Mill, and particularly against the utilitarianism of Jeremy Bentham that he grew up with. He suggested On Liberty that we're more complicated. We're not calculating machines. We can't just be measured in terms of our pleasures and our fears. What's your definition, Cass, of what we are, of how we operate? And is that one way of getting to defining what liberalism is? Are you ultimately, do you think, a utilitarian? Do you come out of that Bentham tradition?
Okay, these are deep questions, and I'm thinking about a footnote that John Rawls never published, which says we post a signpost, no deep thinking here, things are bad enough already, and I kind of love that. Now,
Yeah.
with respect to human nature, I don't have anything particular to say to define it. I do stand with Mill and against Bentham that the notion of pleasures and pains as what are good for people to have, respectively, to have and to avoid, is too crude, that there's awe and wonder, there's fun, and there's sadness, there's awe, and there's amusement. And these are all very diverse things, both on the goods. There's grief, which is different from frustration. There's distress, which is different from annoyance. These are negative things. And to emphasize qualitative differences among social goods is super important, and Mill did that. I wouldn't say I'm a utilitarian for exactly that reason, that to align all goods along a single metric of utility is too crude. That doesn't capture either our species or the canine species. I choose that because I love my dogs, but you could choose any number of species where utility as a metric wouldn't be adequate as a description of what's good for people. So I'd say I'm a consequentialist. That is, I think that what ought to be done should be based on the consequences of doing it or not doing it. And that means, with respect to people, we should think about welfare, not like money going to poor people, but human well-being. And that means that freedom is part of what a good life contains. Not having pain, at least other things being equal, that's a good thing. To have a sense of meaning in life is very important, independent of whether you're smiling a lot, to think that your life is meaningful. And liberalism has a lot of rooms in its house on this particular question. So Mill was a utilitarian and a liberal. Bentham was a utilitarian and a liberal. There are plenty of utilitarians who are liberals. Kant, emphatically not a utilitarian, a deontologist, a defining deontologist, who thought that utilitarianism doesn't put at its foundation respect for persons. And he thought that's what should be the foundation, respect for persons. And there are plenty of things that are good to do that don't have good consequences, like not lying. And Kant was a liberal, so are at least most utilitarians. I stand closer to the utilitarians than to the Kantians, but as I say, the notion you can line up everything along a metric of utility seems to me false to human experience and not the best form of liberalism.
Well, in that building, let's pop into the John Rawls room, your friend, who also taught. Did you know Rawls?
I did. I knew him pretty well. That was really lucky.
What do you make of his theories? You mentioned Rawls earlier. You said you're indebted intellectually in part to him. Again, correct me, please, if I'm wrong. My understanding of Rawlsian liberalism suggests that we need to imagine ourselves in place of unluckier people. So, for example, someone like Cass Sunstein might imagine someone who can't play squash or isn't smart enough to teach at Harvard. Is that right? And is that a core element should be a core element of 21st century liberalism?
I think so. So I'll tell you a little story. When I worked in the Department of Homeland Security, I thought I should go down to the southern border just to see something about it. And I went there and I saw a short line of people trying to get interviews so maybe they could get into the United States. And two of them were Russian. And whether they should get in, I have no idea, but they had been traveling very arduously to get to the opportunity maybe to get in. They were obviously exhausted. And I asked one of the officials there if I could talk to them And they said, no, you can't talk to them. And I said, could I wave? And they said, yeah, you can wave. And I waved, and I might have said something like, hope you're okay, something like that. And they gave a response, which was affirmative. And I had words go through my head. I can't recall those words ever going through my head before or since. There, but for the grace of God, go I. So, with a little twist of fate, maybe it'd have to be a big one.
Yeah, twist of fate. I got the Dylan quote in, and that, of course, is a Rawlsian remark about there go I. So is that? But that seems to be Cass, a kind of mentality and emotion. It's not a. Is it a rational feeling, or is it an emotional one?
Let's talk about Rawls a bit. So Rawls's view which is a liberal view. This isn't the only route to liberalism. There are many liberals who disagree with this, but Rawls says that the principles of justice are those that you would choose behind a veil of ignorance if you knew nothing about your wealth, nothing about your gender, nothing about your race, nothing about your capacities, even, and your talents. What would you choose then? And he says you choose a lot of liberty, and he says you'd also choose to allow inequalities so long as they work to the benefit of the least well off. That's what he called the difference principle. Whether he's right about the things that people would rationally choose, and he's very keen on rationally choosing, not emotions. He says the veil of ignorance reflects our reflective judgments about how to think about justice, and he puts to the reader, if you think the veil of ignorance isn't the right way to think about it, do you think that justice can be sought by taking your privileges, if you have them, as the foundation, or would that distort your judgments? And he is making a bet that people will, on reflection, agree that that would distort their judgments. So the veil of ignorance, he says, is what we would reflectively think is the right thought experiment for figuring out what justice requires. And then he says, in a second step, here's what people would choose from behind the veil of ignorance if they knew nothing about themselves. They choose a lot of liberties, and they choose to allow inequalities if they work for the benefit of the least well off. There's a lot more going on in Rawls than I just summarized, but that's a lot of the heart of it. And I think that I don't agree with him on the difference principle, by the way. I think that if you have, this is pretty technical, but if you have some inequalities from which almost everyone benefits, meaning a lot of people are doing great and some people aren't benefiting from those inequalities, I think that's okay. So I'm not with Rawls there. But I think the veil of ignorance idea is a very appealing form of liberalism. If you don't, and I think probably most people on the political right wouldn't like the veil of ignorance idea as the foundation and wouldn't like what falls out of it for Rawls, that's fine. You can be a liberal too and disagree with Rawls on that. Where Rawls is super important, I think, is not only in the veil of ignorance stuff for thinking about justice, but in emphasizing that we can be political liberals, not left of center. I'll get to what that means, even if we're not perfectionist liberals. And this is pretty technical, but it means suppose you think, I believe that devotion to God is what I should live for. And this liberal stuff about autonomy and freedom of choice, that's not what I think my life is for. My life is for devotion. You might be a Catholic or a Jew, and this is what you are grounded in and committed to. Rawls says a political liberal is extremely open and hospitable or too weak, but kind of directionally right. Liberalism is just a political creed about freedom and some other things that are economic. It doesn't require everyone to live a life of autonomy in which there are choosers. Whereas Mill, by contrast, a perfectionist liberal, as Rawls would call it, is emphatic on the development of the capacity for agency and choice, and everyone should be free in the liberal sense, which would put question marks next to people who have lives where freedom and autonomy are not at the core of their self-understanding. So Rawls says, a liberal says, his form of liberal says to everyone, if you have a life that for you is not about individual agency and freedom, That's completely fine. You don't have to live any particular kind of life. Liberalism allows you too to be free from fear. And if you want to live a life in which you're developing your capacities for choice and, trying to figure out what's the best life for you as a chooser, go for that too. But we're going to be neutral among what Rawls calls comprehensive theories. And this is kind of technical stuff, but think of the United Kingdom or the United States. There's a ton of diversity. And political liberalism of Rawls's sort is very hospitable to and unthreatening to that kind of diversity.
Yeah, I wonder whether the reason why Mill's liberalism, as you say, is so perfectionist, because he has such a perfectionist, bullying father. I don't know anything about Rawls's parents. Maybe they were less bullying. And of course, the idea of freedom and family, it's another subject, maybe another book. You talk about the politics of liberalism. Cass, I know in the book you talk about FDR's Second Bill of Rights. Is that from his State of the Union address in 1944? Is that your model? Are you ultimately a New Deal liberal?
I am. So I love Roosevelt. I love the Second Bill of Rights. But I want to emphasize that many liberals don't. And if we give up the Second Bill of Rights and take on board liberal commitments to freedom of speech, freedom of religion, the rule of law, respect for pluralism, I'm with, and we're all brothers and sisters here. So those who believe in the Second Bill of Rights, as I do, are very appreciative of those liberals who don't like the Second Bill of Rights. Nonetheless, I will say that Roosevelt's commitment to a right to a good education, to a right to protection against the fears of old age, sickness, and accidents, freedom from monopolies at home and abroad, a social security net for people who are elderly or maybe otherwise unable to take care of themselves. I'm completely with Roosevelt there, and that is my own preferred form of liberalism.
Where are we? I mean, you again, Cass, you know this better than I do. You're certainly not the first or the last person to write a book in defense of freedom, on liberalism, on liberty in the America of the summer and fall of 2025. How much of a crisis is there in MAGA America, in Donald Trump's America, in your view? You're talking to me from the campus of Harvard University, which, of course, is one of the theaters, if you like, of the new war over freedom, individual freedom, cultural freedom, human rights.
What was it Zhou Enlai is said to have said when asked about the French Revolution?
Too early to tell.
Too early to tell. So our country, the United States, has very robust liberal foundations. So my home is in Concord, Massachusetts, which is where on April 19th, 1775, the Revolutionary War was started. And whether you are in Mississippi or California or Texas or New York or Vermont, there's a cultural commitment to freedom. Some people are excited about the individual right to possess guns, some people not so much. But I think whether or not you're excited about it, it's emblematic of the cultural commitment to freedom. The attack on political opponents is not consistent with the liberal tradition. The attack on universities in the form we're observing is there are forms of it that would be quite reasonable and that deserve at least respectful attention. That is ensuring viewpoint diversity on campuses. That's a really good thing to do to ensure that we don't see anti-Semitism on campuses. That's a really good thing to do. To ensure there's compliance with law on campuses. That's also that's consistent with the rule of law, so that's great. But going after universities in some of the ways we've observed are in tension with liberalism. So we're going after particular people who are deemed opponents of authorities. Now, it's not the first time it's happened, but that's not consistent with liberal traditions. I think that liberalism is under severe pressure in both Europe and North America. The collapse of liberalism isn't nigh, but it's a pretty good time to identify traditions that deserve to be celebrated and cherished, even as they're remade, and to see April 19th, 1775, the day when colonists in my part of the United States, they were farmers, protected themselves against British troops with the thought that there's an idea of republicanism, small r, which is better than an idea of monarchy, capital M, and that idea, which reflects a commitment to freedom, to the equality of persons, that's one of the greatest achievements in the history of our species, and to renew it, to commit to it, to make it its best self is not less important now. I'm phrasing it delicately. It's not less important now than it was 20 years ago. The less delicate way to put it is it's kind of more important now than it was 20 years ago.
You worked, as I said, both in the Obama and the Biden administrations. You're a man of great influence. You know everybody, and it seems everything. Do you think that liberals have done a bad job in articulating the promise of freedom in the first quarter of the 21st century? I'm not suggesting we blame either Obama or Biden, but some of these arguments you're making seem so, to me at least, self-evident. And that's not a critique, it's just a statement of truth. And probably to you as well, that we're sitting here talking about why it's important to be free in terms of the law and blah, blah, blah. What has happened over the last 25 years that we need to be making these sorts of arguments?
Okay, it's a great question, and it's a big question. So let's note that Biden and Obama are liberals in two senses. One, they're left of center, and the other is they're part of the liberal tradition, which emphatically includes the right of center. So let's notice that both President Bush's were liberals in the second sense. They were right of center, but they were also committed to freedom, pluralism, the rule of law, and to security. Ronald Reagan was right of center and very much a liberal. George Washington was a liberal, James Madison a liberal, Alexander Hamilton a liberal, Winston Churchill a liberal. So this is a pretty big tent. You're drawing attention to liberals in the sense of left of center political leaders. I think Obama in particular did a very good job of both practicing and preaching liberalism. So in his famous speech before he was president at the Democratic Convention, he said, we're not red states and blue states, we're the United States of America. And at crucial moments, he would make clear that his deepest commitments were to the country and not to any set of political left of center, right of center commitments, though he was committed to being kind of centrist liberal as I see it. I don't think Obama in particular could have done a ton better with respect to his form of liberalism. Very emphatic. I know him. He was my colleague at Chicago. I admire him and I like him, so I'm not unbiased here. But I think he did a tremendous job. And you might not like the Affordable Care Act, you might not like Dodd-Frank, you might not like his climate initiatives. Still, he wore the presidency first and foremost as an American, and communicated that. President Biden had many successes and many things that worked with respect to COVID. My view is he did a splendid job of preventing deaths and getting shots in arms. He would not, by his own lights, describe himself as the greatest communicator in the history of the presidency, and that made his presidency less a blazing star in the sky than it would otherwise have been. I should say I've known President Biden for a very long time. I knew him in the 1980s, and when I got hit by a car in 2017 in Concord, Massachusetts, I got hit by a car. I could have been killed. I was in the hospital with lots of broken bones. Phone rang. The first person to call me was Joe Biden. And that's not because he's an intimate friend, not by any means, but because he's a person of literally unbelievable empathy and capacity to be present when someone he knows or someone he doesn't know is suffering. So that personal kindness, I think, is part of the mark of his character, whatever you think of him as president. And if there's a heaven, he's going to get there in a hurry.
Final question, Cass. It sounds to me like the argument you're making on liberalism in defense of freedom is an attempt to bring together both right and left, both people who are sympathetic to Hayek and to Mill and to FDR. But what do you make of the debate now on the left within the Democratic Party about what liberalism should look like in the 21st century? Do you have any dogs in that fight? And do you think that it's essential for the Democrats to define or redefine or reinvent liberalism for the 21st century? Or can they just fall back on FDR's Second Bill of Rights and his speech from 1944? Is there something new needed?
Such a great question. There's always something new needed. So, and I'm thinking this isn't a book for Democrats. It's not a book for Democrats, but I'm hopeful that Republicans will sign on. Republicans, both conservative theorists and practitioners and ordinary people like my dad, who's a Republican, have been at the core of the liberal tradition that I'm speaking of. That is the liberal political tradition. Abraham Lincoln was a Republican, and so was Gerald Ford. And they were, in the case of Lincoln, defining of liberalism. For the Democrats, this is such a great question. There's illiberalism on the left. So the woke left, let's call it, is at times illiberal, not by definition illiberal. So let's say the woke left that is very focused on racism and sexism is bringing forward strands of the liberal tradition and emphatically speaking for one version of them. But there are some forms of woke leftists, let's call them, who are not that excited about freedom of speech and who see freedom of speech as kind of a problem, and not that excited about freedom of religion, and certainly not that excited about private property. So that, I think, is illiberal leftism, and I'm not excited about it.
When you say not excited, you mean you disagree with them?
I disagree with it. I think it's worrisome and dangerous, and potentially an abridgment of freedom if the relevant people are in power, as sometimes they've been. In terms of making liberalism new, you can't just go back to Roosevelt. And one thing that I think liberals need to do as part of the project, which is, I think, should be focused on individual agency, where everyone in their own lives gets not to, do terrible things, but gets to make the best of themselves through opportunity. Opportunity is a big theme of the book. Would focus on kind of correcting, I think the right word is illiberal, but whether or not that's so, a tendency on some part of the leftist left, let's call it, to kind of try to make people ashamed of themselves, either because of American history or because of their own whatever. So trying to make people feel ashamed is a very unkind thing to do, and it often creates understandable reaction. So a liberalism that is free from shaming seems to be a very good path forward.
Well, Cassar Sunstein, you are not only a theorist of liberalism or agency, but you're also a pin-up as a champion squash player. You may not be total professional, but remarkable life, remarkable ideas. You got the fact that you're somehow, I don't quite know how you're doing it. You're publishing 2 books within a week of each other on liberalism in defense of freedom, which is most of this conversation, but also this manipulation book, which is out this week too, is in itself a manifestation of agency, maybe a proof of liberalism. As always, Cass, wonderful to have you. I hope it won't be another 5 years till you reappear on the show. So congratulations on the book, and we'll talk again in the not too distant future.
An honor and a pleasure. I really thank you.